It's clear from this debate that both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden's political Teflon is no longer in existence. The reality is Kamala Harris had a jaw-dropping, catapulting performance. And the bottom line is, at the very core of what Democrats are looking for in this nominating contest, they care about climate change, they care about protecting choice and comprehensive immigration reform and standing up for working people. But the pivotal issue of this presidential primary contest is coming up with a nominee who can ultimately take out Donald Trump, defeat POTUS, and win the White House. And Kamala Harris showed at this first debate that she can go toe-to-toe with the frontrunner Joe Biden. She took off the gloves, she held her own, and she had an outstanding and spectacular performance. I think clearly voters are seeing a shift, and they're now potentially perceiving her as someone who can go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump.
You get to say took off the gloves 5 times this year. That's one. Okay, as you mentioned, the number one issue for Democrats, it's still who can win in 2020. You know, and it's overwhelmingly that way. And we've seen Biden's numbers fall, while Harris and Warren and almost everyone else has seen their numbers improve. So if everyone else is seen as electable and able to beat Donald Trump, what does that leave Biden with?
Right. I mean, that was the whole concept of, like, why he was so formidable, why he was untouchable. There was this sort of inevitability factor. At the end of the day, going back to my initial point, like, the core reason he had this support was because Democrats wanted to defeat Donald Trump, and he was the perceived only singular sort of candidate who had the strongest chance of doing that. But it's clear from his weak debate performance that Kamala Harris and, frankly, Elizabeth Warren, who wasn't on the debate stage with him, both of those candidates had stellar performances. And I think voters, particularly Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, are starting to look at those two candidates as plausible candidates that can take on the commander-in-chief.
Here's this moment from Senator Kamala Harris from last week's debate, you know, which has been, you know, such a benefit to her campaign and her polling numbers. Here it is.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision. So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to pass the Equality Act.
Okay, so is Biden now fair game? Will the rest of the field be going after him in the same way as Harris did?
I think they should, but let's not forget, like, this was Biden's gaffe to begin with. Like, there was no other candidate who, like, brought up Biden's close friendship with segregationists. Like, this was a self-inflicted wound that he did to himself. So, yeah, it was absolutely fair game. The reality is this is a leader who's been in office for decades, and he needs to be an open book. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to have a bloodbath of a Democratic brawl. In terms of this presidential primary, we need to have an open debate about all the candidates, all of their records. We need to have a dialogue about that, because that is the only way that the strongest candidate is going to ultimately prevail and be in a very strong position to propel themselves to the general election and ultimately take on Donald Trump.
Yeah, and, you know, at this point, though, you know, polling data is important, but money talks louder. And Mayor Pete Buttigieg he's had a big second quarter. Here are the numbers, raising almost $25 million, 3 times the previous quarter. But if you look at the numbers, it's his first-time individual donors, almost 300,000, which is really significant. So what does that say to you?
It's remarkable. I mean, it's clear that there is a groundswell of grassroots support for Pete Buttigieg. He had a solid performance, by the way, at the debate, too. Obviously, it wasn't at Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren's level, but he held his own, and he had a very, obviously, solid performance. But I think, look, this clearly puts him into the top tier of candidates. We haven't yet seen him tick up into double digits in polling. Obviously, once you start spending down those resources and communicating with voters, you know, that's going to help tick up those points a little bit. But this, let's not forget, if you think about last quarter's performance, I mean, he skyrocketed above what Bernie Sanders raised, which I believe was just under $20 million in the first quarter. But Bernie was, of course, the top fundraiser for the first quarter. So this is obviously an epic performance. The question now is, like, where does Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker and the rest of the field stand? No one else to date has released their numbers.
Yeah, we should note that the president at his campaign rally in Orlando raised, I think, $24 million after that for his campaign. Let's finish up with, you know, do we get a hint here of how this election will actually play out, you know, with Don Jr. retweeting that nasty vile comment about Kamala Harris and her racial background. You know, he deleted the retweet within a few hours, but by then, you know, others had picked up, they were running with it. In some ways, you know, damage was done, and the Trump family was back in the birtherism business.
I feel like I need to search for a word that adequately describes that tweet. I think I'm going to go with deplorable.
Yeah,
I mean, right? The fact of the matter is this is more of the sort of racist, abhorrent activities that we've seen from the Trump campaign, the Trump family, the Trump organization, the Trump allies, Republican cronies that support the president. But I think Democrats ultimately are going to be talking about issues. And bottom line, the American people are going to be behind them. I mean, the American people want health care as a human right. They want to tackle climate change. They want a pathway to citizenship for the DACA recipients. And so if Democrats stay laser focused sort of on these issues and don't get into the gutter with Don Jr., I think we're going to be in a very solid position come November of 2020.
Oh, we'll see. Yeah, it's a long, long road ahead, Dave.
It is indeed.
And we'll be talking to you plenty before then. Thank you. Good to see you.
I appreciate it, John. Take care.
Cheers.